Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's Weekly Forex Forecast for the 22nd of June to the 26th of June 2020. As always, we're going to start off by looking at the US dollar index and crude oil before running through a number of markets, looking at the key levels of support and resistance in the process. And we're also going to be highlighting some of the targets that we're going to be looking for in this coming week and also for the weeks ahead. So I hope you're having a nice weekend. Let's jump over to the charts and see where the money is this week. As always, we're going to start off by looking at the US dollar index. Now, last week we actually had a near-term reversal in the dollar index. This break to the upside last week actually signals the end of this down move. We may actually go into a bit of a correction in the dollar index, especially as we have not broken the 97.95, which is a key area of resistance. If we are going to get a bigger reversal to the upside, we would really want to clear the 97.95 before we considered the dollar as being bullish. So as a result, going into next week, we actually have the dollar index inside a range between the 97.95 and the 96.60. What this means is, whereas we usually use the dollar index as a compass to guide us in the dollar pairs if the dollar is strong one way or the other, or if it's weak, but this week we do not really have any clear bias in the dollar one way or the other. So we're actually going to be trading the pairs on their own merits. That is to say, how the individual markets are structured without a strong bias in the dollar one way or the other. And when the dollar index itself is in a ranging mode, what this means is very often you will see some currencies which appreciate against the dollar and some currencies which depreciate against dollar. You won't see all of the dollar pairs moving one way or the other. So there is a very good chance we have that next week if we continue to range in the dollar index. So we will be trading the pairs this week on their own merit without a strong bias in the dollar one way or the other, as I said. So the next market we're going to look at is crude oil. Now, last week we started the week down in this area and we were looking for continuation to the upside. We did have a break and a continuation to the upside in this market. We did not come all the way to the target set from last week at 40.93. So very simply put, going into this week, we are looking for this target to be achieved to the upside. Any pullback in this area, once again, very similar to just over here, is going to be viewed once more as an opportunity to start to look for bullish setups. And we're once again going to be looking at initiating longs up towards the next key of resistance to the upside and the target set at the 40.93. So the next market we're going to look at is euro dollar. Now, last week we had a reversal to the downside in the euro dollar, just as we had that reversal to the upside in the dollar index, because the euro dollar moves inversely to the dollar index. We are coming very close now to the next key of support to the downside at the 1.11470. So very simply put, going into next week, any pullback in this market, and we will need a pullback towards the 1.2860 to give us some good risk to reward down to this area, but any pullback in this area is going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups. And we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.1147. And if we can get a break through here, we're going to be looking down towards the next key of support to the downside and target 2 at the 1.1009. So the next market we're going to look at is pound dollar. Now, last week with that reversal to the upside in pound dollar, we start the week to the downside. We have also reversed in pound dollar. What we'd like to see going into this week, again, as we're very close to the next key of support to the downside, is we need to have a pullback in this market if we're going to look to short this next week. Any pullback in this area next week is going to be viewed as a great opportunity to start to look for bearish setups. And we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set, the 1.2300. And if we can get a break through here, or if over here we just tag this line and then pull back, because once we take this target out, we'll be removing this and looking for the next one. But if we can get a break through here, we're going to also be looking down towards the next key of support to the downside and target 2 at the 1.2076. So the next market we're going to look at is US dollar Japanese yen. Now, last week we started the week in this area and we were looking further declines to the downside. We did finish the week slightly down, but as you can see, we really did nothing last week in this market. We just kind of moved sideways and then we dropped at the end of last week. So very simply put, going into this week, we are still looking for further declines to the downside. We are still focused on bearish setups in this market. Any pullback in this market is simply going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups. And if we get the right kind of bearish setups in this market, we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside and target set at the 105.01. So the next market we're going to look at is Aussie dollar. Now, we need to look at this market in a little bit more detail this week, because with that near-term reversal in the dollar index last week, it looks like we may potentially, especially if we can get a break above the resistance highlighted in the dollar index, we may be on for a rally to new highs in the dollar. If that's the case, what we're seeing is a reversal in the euro dollar and also in the pound dollar markets, but we're failing to see a reversal in some of these yet. These markets that we're now going to look at may actually reverse next week. So we are going to be prepared to play these markets both ways next week. But this is what we need to see. So in terms of the Aussie dollar for the time being, we are still structured to the upside. We have not yet reversed, even though we've reversed in the dollar index and we reversed in euro dollar and pound dollar. What this means is if we can start to break to the upside here, you can see we've actually created a new high and we have this bull flag in the Aussie dollar. If we can break to the upside, this is how we start the week. Any break to the upside here and a pullback is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish setups. And we're going to be looking at initiating longs up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 0.7132. So this move here is the opportunity we'll be looking for to make money next week. However, if we break this low over here, you need to be aware that this will actually be a near-term reversal in Aussie dollar. And if we break this low, we will no longer be looking for moves to the upside. We will actually be looking for the opposite. We will be looking, if we break this low over here, we will be looking for a correction in this area, and this will become our opportunity to start to look for shorts down towards the 0.65480. So it's not as clear cut as it is in many weeks, and this is because of that bottoming in the dollar index. It just makes things a little bit more complicated next week. So very simply put, we are focused on, as long as we don't break this low over here, we are focused on bullish setups. We need to see a breakout to the upside and we'll be looking to go long. If we break this low here next week in Aussie dollar, we're going to be looking to reverse and short. We'll only be taking short positions if we break this low down to the 0.65480. So the next market we're going to look at is New Zealand dollar. Now, very similar to the Aussie dollar, we are prepared to play this both ways next week. Why? Because although we're structured to the upside, the New Zealand dollar, like the Aussie dollar, is very close to actually reversing. And when it reverses, we're going to have to switch our bias. Otherwise, we just end up arguing with the market. So very simply put, New Zealand dollar, we're also prepared to play both ways this week. What we need to see is going into next week, at the start of the week, if we're going to look to go long in this market, the setup we need to see is we need to break higher here. We need to break out of this bull flag setup. And this pullback here, this opportunity will be what we'll be looking for to make money to the upside next week in New Zealand dollar. And if we get this kind of break, we're going to be looking at initiating longs up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 0.6643. Now, if we break this low here next week in New Zealand dollar at the 0.6380, you guys have to be aware that this again will be a near-term reversal in the New Zealand dollar. So very simply put, if we end up, say we do not break this bull flag to the upside and we don't get a pullback, but instead we just trade straight through this low, we will be switching our bias to the downside in this market, and therefore any pullback in this area will be then viewed as an opportunity next week to look to short New Zealand dollar, and we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set at the 0.62410. So the next market we're going to be looking at is US dollar Swiss franc. Now last week we were looking for a pullback in US dollar Swiss franc for further declines to the downside. We started the week here and we finished the week here. So again, you can see in a number of these markets, we didn't really do anything. We just kind of moved sideways. So very simply put, going into this week, what we'd like to see is we do go into this week with a bearish bias on US dollar Swiss franc. We need to see a reversal to the downside for the time being though, because this is still correcting. This is still in a counter trend mode. Any break to the downside here is going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups in this market. And we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set at 0.9319. So the next market we're going to look at is US dollar CAD. Now again, this is another market which really didn't move last week. We started the week here and we finished the week here. So we barely moved in the US dollar CAD last week. The reason for this is, and anybody going through the charts now, you can see we have barely moved in a number of markets, but also a lot of these dollar pairs are not showing uniformity. They are actually showing different structure and they are actually showing different directions even against the dollar. The reason for this is because of what we discussed last week. The stock market is still in a very precarious position and in my opinion could potentially reverse next week to the downside. This coupled with the fact that we have just had a near-term reversal in the dollar, it means the markets are very undecided, and that's what's going on. This is why we're barely seeing some of the markets moving, and we're seeing a lot of the pairs against the dollar showing all different things. We're in a potential bottoming in process in the dollar and also a potential reversal to the downside in the stock market, in my opinion. So this is what we have to consider going into next week, because it also increases our risk as traders. We need to actually be careful because the markets could start to move quite strongly if we do get a sell-off to the downside in the stock market. But the US dollar CAD is just showing the very similar signs that we've already discussed, in the sense that it hasn't moved and there's lots of indecision in this market. What we'd like to see going into this week, if we are going to trade this pair, is we really want to see a break to the downside, which we didn't get last week. Any break in this area, any break of this counter trend move, is going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to look for bearish setups. And we're going to be looking at initiating shorts down towards the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.3282. And last but not least, we have gold. Now, last week we did actually break to the upside in gold, and we're going to this week starting with a bullish bias in this market. What we'd like to see is any pullback in this area now is going to be viewed as an opportunity, especially if we can come back and retest broken resistance from the past, turning support once again. You can see it's already support over here, turning support once again at the 171,260. Any pullback in this area in gold is going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to look for bullish setups. And we're going to be looking at initiating longs up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set, the 1794.98. So that is it for me for this week, guys. Again, I just want to reiterate before I go what we discussed last week, because the markets didn't really move very much last week. So I want to make the point which I made last week again, which is that the stock market is still, although it's rallying and recovering, it's still in a very precarious situation. And if we do get a sell-off in the stock market, this is going to lead to dollar strength. So this will also lead to inflows into the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen. It's the same message as I gave you last week. And the reason I'm telling you that is, if you are, for whatever reason, looking at shorting the dollar next week, or you're looking to go short the Japanese yen, you just need to be aware that any sell-off in the stock market is going to see flows into those currencies and they will strengthen. So if you are going short the dollar, short the Swiss franc, or short the Japanese yen next week, just keep your risk sensible and just bear in mind those inflow risks from the stock market if you're taking those positions. So, as always, I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend and a fantastic trading week next week. A big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel, and also for those of you who comment on the channel on a regular basis. With that said, guys, the only thing left for me to say is take care and don't forget to trade safely.